Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Inga Cotton. I'm the founder and executive director of San Antonio Charter Moms. And this summer, we're sharing at-home learning activities so that families and kids and teens can stay engaged with learning over the summer. And some of it is to address maybe gaps that might have happened because of distance learning. But we also want to support mental health, social emotional learning, and resilience because it's been a tough year, and summer is kind of our chance to recharge. So I'm super excited that we have a return guest, Kristen Henry, and she wrote a fantastic guest post for us, and it's live on the blog. And so please, there's a link to it in the description of the video. So I hope you will please read the post. But Kristen, I'm so happy you're here. Let me tell you a little bit about her background. She is an independent education consultant. You can find her at KH Literacy Education, and but she has a background as a teacher, and also but her work is in helping teachers to create better conversations in their classrooms. And so her passion is books, literacy, and that's what the post is about. Is that it's been a crazy year and a half, and we want our kids, our students, our teens to be able to process that information. And how do we do that? And books and fiction and nonfiction are a great tool to do that. So Kristen has recommendations about that. So with that, welcome, Kristen.
I'm glad to be back. I always have a great time with you on here. So I was very happy to be back on the blog and back on this as well. So awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed your social media posts about visiting different towns and, getting to meet with educators and kind of watching the world, gradually reopen as folks get vaccinated and, kind of get back to work. And that's been really encouraging. And I see your post of your running. So go, Kristen, go.
Yeah, I'm all over the place. It's actually kind of exhausting because I was so used to kind of being a hermit, and now I'm kind of out in the world, and I'm I'm tired now. So, but it's good. I'm happy to be back out there, and I've actually been back on campuses since about September. But now more and more and more, and helping teachers with hybrid and kind of balancing that sort of stuff. So it's been a very interesting learning experience for me and how to support teachers, but also giving me insight into kind of everything that's been going on with both in-person learning, at-home learning, virtual, hybrid, the whole challenge of it. So it was an interesting 2021 school year. I'll say
that. Yeah. And that was so in the spring, we had a conversation where I came to you and said, okay, last year you wrote these great posts for us in the summer about mindfulness, about how to check in with our emotions, how to shift our emotions to the place where we want them to be. And those were wonderful posts. And they're linked in the, so if you want Kristen's greatest hits, go to the blog post, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll find her posts from last summer, which are still very timely and relevant. But we were talking about okay, what's topical now? What are people trying to process? And there's just when we talk about this stuff at the dinner table at my house, we talk about current events, and we talk about the news and the headlines, and it's just a lot. And kids, especially the older they get, the more they tune in and they notice probably maybe more than we give them credit for. So they've got questions about this. And I know you have experience as an English teacher. You taught high schoolers, you taught literature. So I guess drawing on your background as a teacher and kind of what you've seen this past year, coaching teachers, how do you think teenage students are responding to what's happening in the world, and how can books help them have deeper discussions about those events?
Well, I think the power, I've always really believed in the power of narrative, because it can reach you, in places that a headline on a news story is just never going to, right? Because you get taken into the world of this character and you see a different perspective and you deal with the choices of that character. And that's where students can really dig in and build empathy and make connections and look at it from another character's perspective that they might have never, thought about. And you see students make these great connections. I know in the blog, I talk about reading The Book Thief with my students, which is it takes place in World War II Germany, and it's narrated by Death. But it's a great book, right? When I read it, I don't know that I have ever cried so much at the end of the book. And I had students share with me that same thing. Like I cried for my own family. And they were not, living in a bombed out German time in World War II, but they could still make this connection with what was happening in the book. And later I did literature circles with my students, and we did books that all kind of dealt with technology and like medical technology. So we read books like The Uglies, Unwind, House of Scorpion, Adoration of Jenna Fox, which all deal with medical technology and the power of it. And I was having these great conversations with 14-year-olds about, are we ethically prepared to make decisions about medical technology, and like cloning and things like that. And they'd have these great in-depth conversations that they'd be like, so I saw this thing in the news and I think this is related to this. And the kids were making all these great connections to things in the news. And they at 14 were thinking about, are we ethically mature enough as a society to do this? So kids can absolutely take literature and narrative, specifically young adults, and make connections and start to really think at deeper levels that they're not going to get to by just like looking at a link on social media, right? They will engage with that at a deeper level. And which gives us like an in. It was my in to start talking about those things and get some really deep thinking. And we can do that too with what's going on right now.
Yeah, yeah. So in the blog post, you mentioned that you listened to a Brene Brown podcast. So shout out to Brene Brown. She puts a lot of good information out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And you said so she interviewed an author named Dr. Angus Fletcher, who had published a book about inventions and sort of learning. Of course
I have it. I'm getting back into not reading everything on my iPad and actually picking up the book.
So what based on like that conversation like sparked some of the ideas in your post and about empathy that right, that when you read a really great work of fiction and then there's sort of devices that authors use to get us like really putting ourselves in the shoes of the fictional characters that we're reading about, or the if it's nonfiction, like the people whose lives are featured in the story. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so he starts talking about, because he's part of a program where they look at narrative and the power of narrative, and he has this concept that it's actual authors that have invented these either plot devices, dramatic devices, characterization that actually allows us to do something we would have not normally done. And so, the one that when I was looking through the book, I was looking through specifically what are the inventions that would help us or young people or people together to be able to identify or at least empathize with other people that we are not like, that have a different perspective, a completely different life. And one of the ones is about like being able to identify with a character. And his example of the structure is the soliloquy in so Shakespeare, there's always been a monologue, but a monologue is to another character. A soliloquy is just to the audience going, man, this is what is going on in my head. And there was no other way before in drama for me to let you know. Right. So he talks about Hamlet's soliloquy, right? To be or not to be. And where we are not Danish princes, right? But it doesn't mean that we can't see, I might have had like an internal conflict like this before. And so he explains how that's also possible in the novel. And he actually uses Scout from To Kill a Mockingbird to kind of show us that we not only identify with her, but we can identify with Atticus and we can identify with Boo Radley. Again, not something we grew up with. We didn't grow up in that town. That isn't our situation. We're not Boo who's afraid of people. But we can start to see things through the perspective of others. And so that was one of them. Empathy, that when we kind of see how characters struggle with decisions, that even if we don't agree with that decision, we can still empathize with the reason that they made it. And then relearning, which is how we can go and look at something that we thought we really knew about and look at it through fresh eyes. And relearn it, which I think can be important for us, adults, when we have learned things a certain way And then maybe we are given a different perspective and we can kind of integrate that into what we're doing. So those were the main ones. There's 25, right? Those were the ones that I thought for young adults were probably the most powerful. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, empathy and relearning are very timely for what's happening in current events, because I think that's and you give some examples of topics that are in the news, but that we can kind of think about and address through fiction. And I think what's important is right, like there are a lot of problems in the world right now that we can start to solve if all of us can learn to use more empathy, and if we can relearn and maybe break some of our bad assumptions and biases and learn better ways of interacting with other people. So I was wondering if you could connect up with, okay, so these inventions that authors use, connect that up with young adult fiction, because that's like the really the heart of the post of these great recommendations you have. And what are some of the ways that like families can use this during the summer when maybe it's not as structured, right? Like they're not being assigned books to read for school, but like we as like the adults in their life can like encourage them, to pick up some of these great books.
absolutely. Because I mean, during the school year, a lot of times kids have a lot of assigned reading. They have a lot of homework, and especially I think with the virtual that even got a little bit more interesting. But yeah, it was actually inspired. I was actually tutoring a student who was reading A Long Walk to Water, which is usually read in like the middle school, kind of those middle years. I think that the student I was tutoring was a sixth grader. And it's about what's going on or what happened in Sudan. And we know there's still conflict in Sudan, so I think it is still topical, but it deals with issues of war, like the civil war in Sudan, the issues of lack of water, and then the fact that, and it's based on a true story. So it's a literary nonfiction. So it's based on a true story. And then, how the young man ends up becoming a refugee out of a refugee camp. And I think you see a lot of news, either here or in Europe with all the refugees, all the refugees. In fact, even in the news, it was like, how many refugees are we going to take into the country? And this is the first really firsthand view of what are some of the things that cause someone to be a refugee. And actually, it starts when he's very young, and he doesn't become a refugee till he's an adult. And there's the same author has a picture book that deals with some of the similar things. So if you have a younger child, Naya's Long Walk, which is like a narrative that's worked into here, is also a picture book. So it's something that you could introduce with a younger child as well. So we have kind of international refugees, which again, I feel like, it's always in the news of how many refugees are going to be let into the country and who are these people. And so this kind of gives you a view of, well, what does it really mean to be a refugee? What type of people are refugees? Putting kind of a face to a name. And that's kind of what inspired the post, was I'd read that. And then I went back and read a book that I had wanted to read because I had seen the author speak. And it's another literary nonfiction. So this is also based on a true story. It's called Enrique's Journey. I read the adult version, but there is also a young adult version of it. And it is based on a 17-year-old boy's trek from Honduras to the United States to find his mother. So I know everyone's like, oh, there's all these, unaccompanied minors. And we're like, why are they there? Well, he's looking for his mom. His mom was already here. And so it's through that, interview with him and his mother, that for me, gave me a lot of insight into why, right? Why is this happening? Why are there children without their parents? Why do people make the decisions that they make? So, because it's not, yes, it is his journey, the physical journey, but it's also the relationship with him and his mother, and her dealing with the decisions that she made when she decided to come to the United States. And so you might not agree with some of their decisions, but you empathize with why they made them. And I think that's why it's so powerful, because I don't, you don't see the level of, there's poverty in the United States, but it's not to the level of poverty that there is in some Central American countries. So I don't think if we don't hear it, we don't really know exactly, the level of desperation. So that was one that, like I said, she's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and she has a lot of different, she's very good at putting in like different viewpoints. And so you can kind of see the whole picture, which I think helps put, a lot of headlines into context rather than just the headline and the, sensationalist view of what it could be. It gives us a little bit of context.
Yeah, headlines can oversimplify, and overgeneralize, I guess. And when you're following a particular narrative, it makes it specific, and it allows us to do the perspective taking, right? Because like you said, we may not agree with their decisions or why they did it, but if we stop and open our minds, open our hearts, we maybe get a sense of why they did it, why they felt like it was necessary, and to appreciate that there are many people in the world who live very differently than how we in the United States are living.
Yeah. And it will, there was a scene where, along the train route, there's some communities that are very like hostile towards migrants. And then there's some that would give them the shirt off their back. And it's just it's very inspiring, because like, oh my gosh, like these people don't have anything, but they're going to help them. And so it'll hit you in places where you're like, oh my gosh. Just different people's experience. And if you have a younger child and you want to talk about immigration, this is a beautiful book by Duncan Talatui. I probably butchered his last name, but it's beautiful because it is, one, it has these beautiful like Mexican American art, kind of like what Diego Rivera kind of mural. But Pancho Rabbit is trying to go find his father in El Norte. And of course, we have the coyote, which of course also means smuggler. So we have this visual representation of the rabbit looking for his family. So for younger children, it kind of put in perspective of like trying to be together with family. So it's a way to maybe talk about it without maybe some of the more graphicness that you'll get in the older students. So
I really appreciate that. Yeah. Oh, I just want to comment about this is a theme that we have like in all of our at-home learning posts, is we try to like ask our authors to help parents to adapt these things for kids at different ages. Because I want people to like, hopefully they'll see it and they'll think, wow, this is a really important topic. There's so much happening in the world. I want to communicate with my kids about it. But then they're like, oh, but I have a teenager. Like they want the full thing, so, right. They could read the adult version, or the whole family could read the young adult version, either way. Or if you're like, oh, this is a really important topic, but my kid is 6. Like, how do I, like, they're not ready for, the really scary stuff that's in the adult version. So, so I really appreciate that you've got, and I want to mention in the blog post, I dropped in links to the Goodreads pages for these different books. And so that like, once you click on that, then whatever bookstore you want to order it from, or a local store or whatever, but it'll get you the specific like ISBN numbers and everything for the readers, so they can, get their hands on these books.
And I'm sure, now that libraries are starting to be open more, that librarians will be happy to dive into, or the school librarians, if the library at school is open again for summer, school librarians are there's so much young adult and children's books that cover great topics. And I think I put some links in there to like some top 10 lists and award winners that are pretty amazing.
Yeah. Can you do more, give us more visual aids, and then we can dive into the recommendations, like research of like how to find more good YA books.
So this is a classic. It's a classic now, I think. It's The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. She has a new book out and I haven't read it yet. And I want to say there's a movie, but I haven't watched it yet because I kind of tend to fall in love with the books. And I love it because it shows all the different perspectives and complexities of what happens after a policeman shoots a Black teenager, right? And so it's told from the perspective of a Black teenage girl who witnesses her friend shot by a police officer, and he dies. And so it's all of her emotions, but it's, the emotions of her dad and her mother and her community and her uncle, who happens to be a police officer as well, of her friends that she goes to a private school. And so most of her friends are white and her boyfriend is white. And so it really, it doesn't simplify the emotion or that would happen if you witnessed that. And that's what's nice is there's never it you still have that by the end. You still have that kind of angst and that how do you deal with these types of situations and what is good for the community and what is good for you. And so that's what I really like about it because I feel like it's very complex and it's told in her voice. It's a first person. So through her, you get to see her perspective, right? You get to identify with her, but you also get to identify with her dad, right? And her mom and her uncle and her friends, who all have a slightly different view, right? Even though they are in the same neighborhood, right? They all have a slightly different view of what happened and perspective of it, which I really like.
I
And
remember when I read it, I was like, "Oh, this is a school choice story," right? Because her family chose to continue to live in their historical neighborhood, but then she's going to school in a completely different community, and, like, whereas other folks in her life have, like, moved out to the suburbs and just and, like, what all that means, and, like, me as, like, school choice expert is like, I really get into that part, but I appreciate how the book doesn't have there's no easy answers.
no,
There's no there's and the book doesn't tell you what to think. I mean, it just tells the stories and you figure it out, and, I mean, a great discussion starter.
I think so because you can talk about the choices of the different characters, right? Why did this character make this choice? Why did this character make this choice? What do you think led to that? And I think those are the discussions people are like, oh, well, if I was in that situation, I might have made that same decision too. And I think that's what's so powerful. Like you might never be, hopefully you never witness that, but it makes you understand why people make the decisions they do. So I think my last one is Stamped. This is based on the Dr. Ibram Kendi, who also, if you also want to listen to a little bit more Brene, she does a great interview with Dr. Kendi that really kind of explains things and, the combo of Dr. Kendi and Brene explaining racism, it's kind of clear. This is the, as it says, it's the remix, and it's written by the remix is written by Jason Reynolds. So Jason Reynolds is and I meant to put this in the blog. He is the young adult author ambassador. I need to look it up, but he is definitely a spokesman for young adult and powerful young adult writing. One of my favorite books in verse, Long Way Down, is by Jason Reynolds. So if you're looking for good young adult fiction, Jason Reynolds is a fantastic author. But he took Dr. Kendi's adult version and put it into a young adult and just recently a kid's version. And it's basically, it'll say it's not a history book. Like that's the first thing it says. This is not a history book in terms of what we think history is, but it kind of takes us through the whole concept and like where did the concept of racism come from, and then how was it used throughout history, and in a way that I put this under like relearning because there was a lot of stuff I had never heard of, I had never seen, or I had never seen it from that perspective. And so it gave me a different view as an adult. So this is where I'm like, you could read this with your kids and learn a little bit, have a conversation. And like, I haven't read the actual, the original. I've only read the young adult, but at some point I'll go back and be like, okay, what else was in there that they didn't put in there for the young adults? It is written in young adult language. So if you are me and I'm reading it and I'm like, that's a little informal. Well, it's meant to, it's meant for like teenagers and preteens to be able to go, all right, this is my style of language. And, but it goes through a lot of history and it goes through a lot of complicated topics. And I think it's very informational. It's a great way to bring in some different discussions that probably aren't going to happen in a history class. So
it's something we talk about this in the discussion group on Facebook, right? The San Antonio Charter Moms discussion group, of which if If you're not a member, listeners, I would encourage you to join. But it's a question that comes up. Like families will ask, well, like, well, at this particular school, like how far will the teachers go? You know, how much do they talk about current events? How much do they talk about like these like deep like values conflict kind of issues, right? That occur through all of American history. How do they handle it? And I think to some extent, I mean, I want schools to face issues head on,
Mhm.
but the reality is that like you may have chosen that school because they have a great career education program, or you may have chosen that school because they're great at teaching phonics and literacy, but then you decide at home you're going to supplement with the real stuff. And like even if the school is dealing with current events and tough subjects, you may still want to have these discussions at home as a way of transmitting values, as a way of like character formation, and like just saying this is what we stand for as a family, right? And it's not just words, it's what you do. It's like, do you march in the MLK march? How do you treat your neighbors? Like how do you vote? Are you civically engaged? And like I think all of those things are part of raising our kids, raising the next generation to be, like we're we're leaving them with some tough problems, right? So we're gonna try to fix things as best we can in the time we have left,
Yeah.
but we're gonna have some tough issues to deal with. And I mean, immigration is not it's not going away, right? Racism is still a very pressing issue. A
Mhm.
lot of people are still being mistreated every day. So how do we have all got work to do. So having I think families taking some time in the summer to have these discussions is so important, and having and then these books, these recommendations, because like parents may have a sense of guilt of like, oh, I feel like I should be doing more on this. It's like I'm like, y'all, Kristen is breaking it down for you. Okay. Here are some books to start with,
Yeah.
right? So there you
Well,
go.
and I think it's important that with so much, um, thrown at kids versus media, that they're, social media, headlines. I mean, there's so much, like we're inundated. Like, I don't know how I would have handled being a teenager, but you can be grounded in novels, literary nonfiction, things that you have, with your family that lets you know, okay, right, I'm going to filter some of this. And, when I think people are saying things that I don't think are right, I have things that I can go back to and I can talk about that. And I can learn how to talk about sensitive, complex issues with complexity and not like they're just black and white, right? And I think
Right, right.
teaching students to be able to look at things in shades of gray and to be able to see perspectives and be able to have conversations about, I mean, we are not good at having tough conversations in this country. We're just not. And that has broken down a lot of what we do. And I think kids need to be able, I would hope that we could raise a generation of kids that will be able to sit down and talk about complex issues with the right level of complexity. And I think that would be better for everybody. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That is a beautiful vision. I'm really glad for your guest post, and I'm glad to be helping, give these ideas a bigger platform. And so before we close out, one of the things I think is really great in the post is that you have these suggestions that you have researched and can recommend, but also you have links about how to find, more young adult fiction. And like really adults, there is no shame in reading the young adult
I love
version. We're all busy. It's all right. Just in everyone should enjoy reading, right?
mhm.
So but and then like you said, like school librarians, San Antonio Public Library, bibliotech, there are professionals who love nothing more than putting great books in the hands of kids, right? So talk to them, use their
Mhm.
expertise. But what are some of the resources that you recommend in the post? Like there's like lists of great young
There
adult books.
is the American Library Association. They have a young adult list. There's also, if you look at any of the, like all of these books have, they're award winning. A lot of the children's books are like the Newbery Award winning, but then there's some that are more like social justice oriented. So you can look at the different award lists, the top 10 young adult for each year. And you can specifically, I believe I put a link on there. You can specifically look for books like if you really want to talk to your kids about social justice. There are specific issues that deal with, migrant, the Asian experience. I mean, that was one where I was I didn't have time to read the book I wanted to read. You know, the LGBTQ issues, trans issues.
Mhm.
If there is an issue, there is a quality young adult book about it. And so you can find all of those, especially if your kids kind of find a passion about something and they want to read more about it. You know, delve into some of those different narratives and stories that would interest them, right?
Yeah, yeah, and, like, my son in particular loves science fiction, and science fiction fantasy is a great landscape for social justice
Mhm.
issues because it's a it lets the author, play with assumptions and kind of push the boundaries,
Yeah,
a little bit. So you can kind of fine tune, like, "Okay, I know you love science fiction, but so here's, you know, a book that
absolutely.
raises social justice issues, but it's also science fiction, so yeah, let's talk about it."
Absolutely. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. Okay, I guess I keep saying this, but I'm super proud to have this post on the site, and I hope lots of families make use of it this summer. But I also want to indicate to people like how they can get a hold of you, or whether they're teachers or how to find your resources. So your practice is called KH Literacy Education,
Right.
right?
So the
And
website is khliteracyeducation.com. And if you want to email me, you just put Kristen at, there we go. Yeah, just email me if I have recommendations or I can get you in touch with someone that will have even more. There is just such a span of young adult lit that I couldn't even like, there's so many new books all the time. Some people will probably think I'm totally dated with what I have up here, but I was like, these are solid. And so, you know, if you've already kind of started, you might have already read these. But if you're just kind of getting your feet wet with some of the different the books that are available, that I think these are a good place to start.
yeah, yeah. Well, and just tell us a little bit about what you do, like how you support teachers in schools, like because I know you used to be like in the district and now you're a consultant, but I see you travel all over the place doing training.
Yeah, I basically coach teachers. It's called instructional coaching. It's basically what I do most of the time. I mean, I do professional development, like past Saturday, I was, training teachers on how to do like really engaging stations. But I train teachers and coach teachers on whatever they need to grow with in terms of mostly teaching English and literacy issues. So, and one of my big things that I am kind of like on my soapbox about is, everyone's like, oh, kids don't read anymore. Kids don't want to read. Kids don't read what they're assigned. And kids have to discover a book that will really get them going, right? I say I became a reader because of Nancy Drew. And I always say you have to help kids find their Nancy, because I wanted to stay up late. I wanted to know the end of the story. I still read detective stories, murder mystery, crime. That's still what I read. That's what I was reading last night. Thank you to the San Antonio Public Library for helping me, find my books on the cheap. But and a lot of times, I'll just say a lot of times what will get students really interested, especially non-readers, is a little bit of controversy. It's a little bit of, oh, I can read about that? Yeah, you can. And it will actually, you tell them, okay, you can read a book about a police shooting where there's a riot. People will be like, oh, that might be something that actually gets them to read, and they get this great perspective and they get to identify with someone, and they get to expand what their perspectives are, right? But a lot of times, um, I think with non-readers, you can't get away from controversy, because sometimes it's what's controversial that will actually hook them, because it's something they're actually curious about and interested about. So don't, if you're trying to get a kid to read, don't shy away from things because they might scare you a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, but just be there to talk it through with them and
Right.
listen and help them
Mhm.
process because
Exactly.
that's how they grow and it helps us grow too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Wow. This is I just and then before we close off, I just want to like cheer for you as you start your PhD program. I'm so
Thank you.
excited for you. And I think that's a great example of like how like even as adults, like we can continue to improve professionally and we can continue like we as adults we should always be learning too. So
Oh,
so I'm cheering for you.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So nice. Thank you for having me again. I love it.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
Bye, Inga. Thank you.